Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm Justin, and tonight we are going to discuss 1999 Stigmata, directed by Rupert Wainwright and starring Patricia Arquette, Gabriel Byrne, Nia Long, and Jonathan Pryce. Frankie Page is a carefree woman living in the moment. Unfortunately, after receiving a crucifix via her mother from abroad, Frankie soon becomes inflicted with mysterious visions and terrifyingly real injuries. Her world soon collides with Father Andrew Kiernan, a Jesuit priest and scientist that has been assigned to either prove or disprove Frankie's injuries as evidence of the stigmata, a phenomenon when the deeply devoted are struck with the five wounds of Jesus. Frankie's visions and wounds escalate, and the two must find an answer before Frankie is hit with the final fatal wound. Stigmata is for the horror fan that enjoys religious horror with 90s style. Also joining me tonight is the amazing Zena Dixon. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bite. I'm Justin. With me, as always, is the amazingly talented and wonderful Zena Dixon, the real queen of horror. How you doing tonight, Zena?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing very well. This is one I've wanted to discuss with you for a while. Everybody, as always, we're going to begin with our non-spoiler reviews. So you're safe for now. You won't get bitten. But a little bit later on, we'll elaborate with spoilers. But tonight we're discussing 1999 Stigmata. This movie is one that I saw in the theater when it first came out. I was super excited. And also, one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this one is because I don't think we've talked a lot about like religious horror on this channel. And, it's a big part of the horror genre. I mean, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, Exorcism of Emily Rose, it goes on and on. It's such a big part of horror. And I'm like, wait, we haven't really talked about any. And this is one that I definitely think has kind of been lost over the years. And I think it's a real gem. I do not think it's like the greatest religious horror movie of all time by any means, but I think it's a lot of fun. I think
Mhm.
it's worth seeing alone for Patricia Arquette's performance. I am absolutely happy every time I get to see something with Patricia Arquette. I mean, again, I've said thousands of times now on this show, I've had two older brothers growing up, and I was that age when Nightmare on Elm Street 3 came out, so I can remember them watching it on a loop. And so Patricia Arquette, I've known since I was like 4 or 5 years old and from film watching. And I've always loved her and thought she was great. But I think she can do anything from Nightmare on Elm Street 3 to
Mhm.
Medium, which I loved her on Medium. That was one of my favorite shows. But also Lost Highway, where she plays such two different characters, even though maybe they're the same. It's David Lynch, you never know. Um, but I think she's just great. I think she has this scream that's just so shrill, and you can like feel it through the television screen or through the film's projector screen. And I think alone, her performance is worth it. And I mean, she gets to run the gamut with this movie. She plays this very sexy, carefree, live by the moment girl that then becomes troubled. And then you see this really dark side of her. And, I think that Patricia Arquette clearly is attracted to those kind of roles. And I think this is one that you can see clearly why she wanted to do it. But I think overall the performances are great. Gabriel Byrne is in it, who is definitely a 90s staple. Now, I personally never got the whole, I feel like he was in a lot of movies where like younger women sort of crushed on him. I never saw that appeal from Gabriel Byrne, but I think he
Mhm.
gets the job done. Like I remember like Little Women, same thing. Winona Ryder's like, has a crush on him by the end. Frankie in this movie has sort of a crush on him, and I'm like, Gabriel Byrne, really? But I think he's a fine actor, and I think he gets the job done. And Nia Long, who I have loved. In fact, the first time I saw the movie Friday, I literally thought she was the most beautiful girl that I had ever seen up until that point. And I love her because in that movie, she obviously plays like the fantasy girl but I love that it's all grounded in reality because she's sort of that unattainable girl, but the girl next door, but also has this tough edge by the end of it where she's like defending her sister. And I feel like a lot of roles that Neil Long plays, she always does that. Like one of my favorite independent movies is called The Broken Hearts Club that she was in. And she also sort of plays that like she's a little tougher in that. But this movie too, what I love though about this, and we'll get more into it in spoilers, is that I like that she also is very devoted, very, she's a loyal. That's what I think I meant to say. Like she's willing to be defend everybody when because she's good at playing these really loyal characters.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I like in this movie is that there's kind of a scene where she's sort of like over it a little bit. Like there's a lot of stuff going on, and she's sort of like, "Hey, I'm in my 20s. I just want to have fun," kind of. But then she, pulls it off, and she still ends up being a good best friend. But then you also have like Jonathan Pryce, who I know him from musical theater, Miss Saigon, Evita, but he was also in Game of Thrones, and he obviously plays. Jonathan Pryce plays these sort of duplicitous characters that are in the religious field very well. And overall, though, I just think it's a really stylish movie. I know this was your first time seeing, is that correct?
Yes.
Well, I'll just say, I saw it in the theater, thought it was great. Didn't think it was the greatest thing I ever saw, but I loved it at the time. Wonderful experience. And I think that people, if you're just looking for a fun ride and you're a fan of like religious horror, I think this one does a great job. It was critically like panned at the time, but it did really well commercially. So audiences enjoyed it, and I think that it's worth a look. But then so Zeno, for your first time watching Stigmata, what did you think?
I really, really love this one more than I expected. The crazy thing is because we spoke about this movie before, and I remember telling you it's been on my watch list for a while. And I remember seeing bits and pieces of it. It was mainly just of people talking, so it wasn't like any like action happening. But around the time when it came out, there were selective horrors, not, yeah, kind of selective horror that I used to like to watch. I wasn't really into watching religious horror. And that's because that's the ones that really scare me.
Mm,
Growing up in like a Christian household, but my parents still let us like watch horror movies. You know what I
right.
mean? This really creeped me out with some stuff, which we'll get into it. Like just the whole feel of the movie. So we talked about the opening before we started recording. I love the opening and I love the opening credits. And
Mhm.
I agree with you 100% that the music like sets the tone. And I love what you said about Frankie Page, Patricia Arquette's character. She's just this free, so cool 20-something-year-old living it up, living her best life, out there as a hairdresser. She has her close friends. She can have a one night stand if she wants to. Her apartment is really cool. She just seems very happy in life and carefree. And then it's not. And I love the fact that where it's just like, okay, I've watched religious horror, but I feel like this one has a very clever take to it for me because I remember with one friend of mine, because I know that he is also a fan of this one. He had a question, which, we can answer this later, but I think that it's a good question. Why her? Right. And I'm thinking to myself, why not her? Because I feel like it's like it could have happened to anybody. But, we'll get into why. But I love the fact that it happened to someone like her, someone who was carefree, someone who didn't even consider herself religious, like at all, and the fact that it happened to her where she is just getting attacked by this unseen thing. That's terrifying. It literally turned her world upside down. And I mean, I feel like even if you're not a fan of like religious horror, I feel like this one is so stylish. Like it felt like End of Days, which Gabriel Byrne, he's in that one. You
That's
know,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so it felt like that one. It also felt like Bless the Child, and it kind of gave me too, if I'm be so brave enough to say, the Crow vibes, because I recently
Mm.
rewatched The Crow, and The Crow gave me like the feels, because that was a movie I would watch bits and pieces of as a kid, and I've finally decided to rewatch it now as a grown adult, and whoa, with the rain, the dark shots, like just it was really intense. Like there's some stuff that, as someone who watches a lot of horror, there's some scenes where it's creepy, but it's more intense, type of moments. And again, we'll get into it, but I love the fact that it happens to someone like Frankie. And I feel like that could have been anyone. And the thing too is, I love the fact that it would happen anywhere. She would be out in public. So, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and so much to unpack. But from here out, everybody, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. You've been warned. Yeah, I hadn't thought of The Crow, but I also, I might have to give it a rewatch because I had seen it probably three times, but all from the ages of like 13 to 15. It's been many years since I last watched The Crow. And yes, it is very much of that time. In fact, I remember like the trailer, for this giving me that vibe of like you knew you were going to see something, for lack of a better word, sort of hit, sort of scary, sort of sexy. And I mean, but it was a different alternative to the screen generation of horror movies that were of that time. I mean, those were dominating the field. Stigmata was an alternate choice,
Mhm.
and it was a, for a slightly older audience, or at least the characters are slightly older as opposed to teens, college age. This is somebody
Right.
in her early 20s, mid 20s. But yes, right from the beginning with the credits, I thought they were just so, because it starts off very solemn, very much like a normal religious horror movie, gonna have these solemn martyr tones. Then all of a sudden it's just energized, and you can see so much that happened, that who this girl is, who Frankie
Yes.
is, right through the credits. And then that gets you right into the movie, which I think is great. And yeah, I mean, it does beg the question of why her, but that's one of the things I like about this movie. One thing that I like about this movie is the religious horror, in terms of it tells you the truth. It's truthful things that have happened, but fictionalized, obviously. And like the Gospel of St. Thomas, and that learning about the Gospels, etc., I thought was just as interesting in this movie. My aunt, though, was deeply religious growing up, and I'll admit, when I was a kid, for similar reasons, religious iconography or visuals bring some sort of fear. I mean, I really think it's from like the paintings that she had and the religious figures everywhere, and then like candles everywhere. That's just who
Mhm.
she was. And so, but from a very young age, like, seeing these when you're 5 years old, seeing somebody hung on a cross with blood, it's a terrifying image. And those things always kind of stuck with me when I would watch The Exorcist. And, I think that like, religious horror doesn't scare me as much as it did, but when I was first like 14, 15, and I'd be like hanging out for like a slumber party with a friend sort of thing, and we'd rent
Mhm.
some movies, I was always nervous when we would get like a religious related horror. Something
Mhm.
about it, just there's something a little scarier about it. I don't know if it's the spirituality. I don't think it's about religion itself. It's just these are things I think we're taught from such a young age, or we learn about, whether you are from a family that goes to church every week or not, for the most part who Jesus is,
Right.
these things. So I think when you see these in film, there's something unsettling just about it, because it's like you already have a certain knowledge about it.
Mhm.
But yeah, the 90s credits, music, I think that's one of the main things that appeals to this movie now. I Not only do I find it incredibly nostalgic, but even at the time, you know, I loved the music of it, the feel of it. I always enjoyed those kind of movies. And but getting what will kind of transform into the performances a little bit, but Patricia Arquette really leads this movie, and you know who this girl is. I mean, one of my favorite line, I think, from the movie is after the first attack, the doctor is insinuating that this may be self-harm. And I
Mhm.
love the line she gives of like, that would never happen. Everybody I know knows I love being me. I
Mhm.
just think that's so like right off the bat, you know who this girl is. And, I like that the movie, though, I will say in some horror movies that are religious centered, I don't always get it. I don't always get how, maybe I should clarify, like the demon possession type movies, which this isn't exactly, but it is there. You like The Exorcist. First several times I watched it, I still wasn't quite sure the connection of the beginning of the movie and how Reagan got possessed. And I think I know what it is now and get it, but It took me a really long time. This movie, what I liked about it is that you might not get it the first watch. I think it's there, but like if you watch it again, you can you get like, oh, okay. So who she's really possessed by is sort of this priest we see at the beginning of the movie, and because of his crucifix that was stolen, it ended up in her mother's hands, who sent it to her. Something about that. But like a lot of movies, at least religious movies or even The Omen or stuff, I feel like that stuff's not always clear or it's more subtext. I kind of appreciated that this movie put that front and center. That being said, it does bode the question of why her, it's so random. But I think it's interesting, a really interesting concept that somebody who stigmata itself is something that is for the deeply devoted. And
Hmm.
so, not that I would think anybody would necessarily want these things to happen to them. This is somebody who's like bargaining for it or would want would appreciate getting it, unlike some, so which so it could be a good thing for them, whereas I like the concept that it's somebody who would be terrified to have something like this happen to them and it be painful and it's not welcome, it was not something being seeked out. I like that concept of what might be what somebody else would want to happen to them, to dumb it down a little, but what they might want to happen to them, somebody else who would never want this is happening it to them. And it's an interesting, idea, I think, an interesting concept.
I definitely agree with you. I had to watch it like again. I watched it twice, just to get like a better feel for it. The first time for funsies, and the second time just get a better feel. And still thinking about that question, like why her? Because it's just kind of like, okay, her mom is the one that bought the rosary, you know. But then after watching it the second time and having some time to think about it, I think that it's because who would they listen to spread the word type of thing, you know?
Oh, that's
And I,
interesting.
yeah, I'm not saying that people don't listen to older women, but it's like, okay, you have this woman she doesn't have a religion, she doesn't believe in God. She loves to party all the time. Literally, she parties all the time. She had a one night stand. She's in her own little bubble, right? And the fact that she doesn't believe in God and she was chosen. Like I feel like that's just so powerful. Like it sounds simple because it sounds simple, but the fact that out of everyone that you could pick, she was picked with that. And I feel like, come on, you imagine you had a friend, and we see it all the time. People go through transformations, but imagine you had a friend that one day they really didn't believe in God, and then next thing you know, they're saying all this stuff is happening. What happened? What made you? I feel like people would listen. I mean, what they decide to do, that's on them, but I feel like they would at least listen. So I found
Yeah.
that really interesting, because normally it'll be like with Bless the Child, it's about a child and she was born and she's gonna save people, be save people. So it's kind of like that. Or even when you think about like The Exorcist, once again, it's a child. I've seen like a lot of horror, like religious horror movies where it could be someone who is very much into their religion and then they're being attacked with that, Even when I think about the movie Death by Temptation from the 90s, there is basically about I'm going down a rabbit hole, but it's basically about a succubus, and this succubus is attacking like this man of God who's like next in line to help his family in a religious way. So point is, I've never seen it. I'm not saying it never happened. I've never seen it this way, where it was someone who is, I don't want to say, I feel like she's more relatable to a lot of younger people. So that's what I found. And even this movie came out in 1999, and I still feel like there are women like her,
Oh,
you know?
absolutely. Hmm. Oh, and why you made me think of something that I've never thought about before. So to piggyback onto that, not only somebody who could spread the word, but at the same time, and maybe I'll get more into this at the end, but obviously one of the things the original priest struggled with was he was sort of under attack because the ultimate message of the movie is something that the church would not want to get out because it could potentially damage the literal church. Um, and Frankie would be the perfect person to kind of hide. If you needed to hide this message and then get it out, Frankie would be one of the perfect persons to be able to do that because She's not somebody who's on, she's not the Pope. She's not
Right.
somebody who's on their in their vision, you know. In fact, I mean they're going to disprove it. I mean, that's the point of Gabriel Burns' character and what Jonathan Pryce is hoping and all this. So I actually think that like not only is it somebody, because I've never thought about this before, so I'm a little on the spot, but I feel like not only is it somebody that would be able to get the word out, which I think is 100% correct, it's somebody who could be kind of undercover to get the
Hmm.
word out. So that is interesting. Yeah, I like that. And that's one of the things, it's one of those movies that even though it's told very, here's the plot, narrative to the point, I wouldn't say there's a lot of subtext. I think it makes all its
Right.
points to the surface. There is some stuff to think about with this movie. And like I said, I do like the religious aspect of it, learning about the Gospels a little and understanding how, even though I'm the type of person who thinks, so the ultimate message of the movie is something along the lines of like, Jesus would want us, you don't need a church to worship him. It could be
Right.
anywhere, anytime. And you know, under a stone, you'll find him wherever you need him to be. It's not necessarily in these mansions, aka churches, which I think is a really powerful message. But it would be damaging to it. I think it would only like help make churches stronger, but I could see the like broad or narrow-mindedness of it being the initial knee-jerk fear from a church to be like, wait, this could damage us. We're and they kind of point that out in the movie that the church is competitive
Right.
and you know the money that comes in is unbelievable.
Hmm.
So I could understand, but I think it could be utilized to strengthen churches because people don't necessarily need to go one to go. But that's always my thing about faith in and of itself is that in order to have faith, you have to be tested on your faith. If it's just something you're taught forever and you never have any other exposures to anything else, is it really faith if you've never had to question whether God is real or Jesus is real? I mean, is it really faith? I believe
Right.
faith comes in when you have these moments and what you do with them and you still choose to believe. So on that line, something to the effect of you don't need to go to church to find Jesus. The church could have faith though that people will still go to church, will still go to the church, you know, and instead I could see this knee-jerk reaction of being like, shut it down, shut it down. We don't want to take any risk or chance. But isn't that what faith is? And I think that's really what the movie's saying. But getting into performances, like you said, Patricia Arquette as Frankie is a perfect character to get this sort of thing out because it's not what the church would be expecting. Because Frankie is somebody who is living life, having fun, not judging others, not letting herself be judged though either. And I think that what makes the movie great is that, like, especially for a younger audience like my age at the time, you kind of want to be Frankie. You want to sort of have that life, a little bit of fun. You know,
Hmm.
she's happy with what she's doing. She's styling hair and loves it. It's
Yeah.
she found what she's meant to do, and I think that holds incredible value. She talks to her mother every week, though, or as often as she can, but she's independent. She's a very independent person, but Patricia Arquette really gives it this character because I think also, like I said about Nia Long, I think Patricia Arquette's also gorgeous. But there's a quality about her that has a sort of unique quality that she can sort of play these character actors or
Hmm.
character roles, as opposed to just like the traditional, maybe romantic comedy female lead, you know, the Jennifer Aniston or whoever. Patricia Arquette has this quality about her that makes every movie special. And I think that she's the main reason to see this movie. I think what she does in it, one of the scariest moments, and we'll get into the suspense when we get to suspense, but you know, when she's sitting there drawing on the wall and painting, and then she turns, and clearly it's like a male voice that's dubbed, but it chills. I remember being in the
Yeah.
theater like just ooh, I couldn't like because that's the sort of thing that does happen in religious horror
Hmm.
that doesn't happen in it really any other horror. It's that sort of unsettledness where you have like somebody like Regan from The Exorcist who all of a sudden has this awful voice, demon voice, which
Yeah.
it's not. And that's what it plays with. Like clearly, Stigmata is a product of all the religious horror that came. It's doing homages, it's referencing that, and obviously a moment like that, but it's doing it its own way because technically, you know, Patricia Arquette. it's the same thing as somebody like Regan, but she's not under demonic possession. She has these demonic fits, but really who she's possessed by is that priest from the beginning of the movie. So you open the movie, you have this priest, these surreal, somber images of a statue, I think, of Mary that's bleeding from the
Mhm.
eyes. You got the setup with Gabriel Byrne, who's like, hey, which is an interesting character, and I'll get into Gabriel Byrne, this scientist priest who is skeptical as he searches these sort of things happening to religious iconography
Mhm.
throughout the world. And he keeps this in mind, but this event kind of startles him a little bit. And it leads to him coming to Patricia Arquette, who, again, is being punished almost, not punished, but she all of a sudden is having these horrible brutal things happening to her that I would be just terrified of, especially somebody who's not religious,
Yeah.
who has no idea what this could possibly mean. And again,
Mhm.
I like that the film gives you that sort of like a medical doctor's going to think she's suffering from epilepsy. So
Mhm.
but she knows something's not right here. And she's getting annoyed and sarcastic, which I love too. She's not whimpering in a corner like, what's happening to me? She's like, can you get yourself together? You want to
Yeah.
put wires in my head? Come on, what's
Yeah,
going
that's
on? This is ridiculous
crazy.
now. Um, and I think like, but you have moments too where Patricia Arquette is like, she sees that image of the woman across the street with the baby who may or may not be Patricia Arquette. I still am never 100% on
Same.
this. It kind of looks like her, but it also kind of doesn't. But again, you have that moment where I love Patricia. Nobody has a scream like Patricia Arquette. And I certainly don't want to siphon down her acting abilities to this scream, but it is nobody else has it. Nobody
Mhm.
else has this scream that she has, which is like primal shriek. It's more of a shriek, and she does it in Medium. She does it in I think Lost Highway. I know she does it in this Nightmare on Elm Street 3. She does it the whole time, and it's one of those things that's like her signature, but it's really effective in this scene. Like I said, though, about Nia Long, what I was alluding to earlier in the non-spoiler part of the reviews, she is the solid best friend, but also I like that like she is also like she's been there. She watches Patricia in the hospital, she stays the night with her, she's watching her the next day, she's concerned about her, but then on Friday night she just wants to have a good time. She's at the bar and she's like, it's Friday. Can we just not tonight
Yeah.
about this? Can we not be
Yeah.
too heavy? And I kind of like that about her. I think it's authentic, and I would at 22, I want to be there for my friends too. But I'm also like, are you cool? Like, I'm gonna go have a drink. Like, are you cool for a
Maybe
minute?
she maybe you should have stayed. Maybe you should have stayed home.
Right. I think tonight was a night to stay home. But I do love that once she sees Patricia Arquette at the club is like crown of thorns thing now I think is happening. She goes after her and she follows her and she's a great best friend. Um, but again, her performance is great. Gabriel Byrne is solid in this. I'll never understand these younger women having crushes on him. It was a thing in the 90s, but he's a good actor. He gets the
Yeah.
job done. But as far as that part of it, I don't quite like because Frankie's like flirting with him, and I'm like, is she? Why?
Yeah, he's
But
great.
again, I'm sure he's somebody's type. I don't get it. But he's great in it. I mean, he is believable as a priest that would be a scientist. Not just Patricia Arquette in this movie. All the performances I think are solid and make it worth it. Again, Jonathan Pryce. I started to say this earlier. He makes a great villain. I mean, but like the guy you can see is also being a good guy, like again, but or like could have a heart of gold, but he often will choose the villainy thing. Again, on Game of Thrones, he's a devoted religious man. He believes he's doing well, which the best villains always do. They think they're the ones doing the best, and he thinks he's protecting the church. But I think he forgets the church is for God, but he's protecting the church.
Yeah.
And also, Enrico Colantoni is in this,
Yeah.
who is in Veronica Mars, who's he's the
Yeah.
dad in Veronica Mars. And I did not know I did not know that when I first saw this movie. Didn't know it in the years that I've watched this movie, but after watching Veronica Mars, I was kind of like, is that him? And it's always funny because he's so great
Mhm.
in Veronica Mars. And so I have to now knowing who he is, I have to just be like, no, he's being serious in this role. Like because he's so like he would be joking about this sort of character in Veronica Mars, so that he's
Mhm.
playing it straight in this is really hilarious. But I also think he's great. But what do you think of the overall performances?
I agree with you for the most part. I feel like you covered it all. Patricia Arquette, she's great as Frankie. Frankie is that girl who, even if you don't want to be her, you don't want to know her, like she'd be your party friend. If you guys plan to have like a party, you want to go clubbing one night, go with Frankie. Gabriel Byrne as Father Andrew Kernan. Okay. I can see why ladies like him. There's just he has something about him. There's this coolness where it's just like, oh my gosh, he would just take care of you. You don't have to worry about anything, type of thing. And so seeing him, like at first I was like, oh, are they gonna get together? I was like, oh, but he's a priest. But kind of like you said, they do have a chemistry. So there's something there. I thought it was odd, but then as time went on, it's just like, I mean, I get it. Jonathan Pryce, like you said, listen, I had a feeling that he was going to be a villain. Like when I first saw him, I was like, he's totally going to be a villain, and as time went on, and then you just saw, like, he kept on saying it's for the church, it's for the church. But it's like, there's a particular scene where he's doing something, and it's just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you, so you know what I'm saying? I don't want to jump ahead. Nia Long as Donna, as her bestie Donna. I love Donna. Donna was like very supportive. You know what I mean? They would hang out together, they would work together, like just that friend that you can confide in, but you can also party with. Like you already said, I agree with you 100%. She was there with her all the time. And then after a while, it's getting exhausting. She was at the hospital. She ran outside
Yes.
in the rain, in the street for you to find you picking up a dirty blanket. Like, I get it, but it's like she was just there the whole time. And then yeah, by the time Friday comes around or Saturday, like, girl, maybe you should have stayed home, like
You
respectfully,
know what's going on, girl, right?
right?
Like you know your life, right? Like stay
Yeah,
home.
you come into the club. I mean, fine. And then, like you said, she kind of switched off. Like she had her moment, but like you said, she's like 20 something, 22 years old. Totally get it. But once again, when Frankie needed her, she went after her friend. So I love seeing that. I love seeing Enrico. I really don't know how to pronounce his last name, but
Yeah.
Keith Morris in the movie. Like I was
Yes.
so happy when I saw him. And yeah, I always see him now as Keith Mars, which was just great to see. But yeah, I love the cast. Like I know the movie isn't perfect, but I just feel like it's very straightforward. This is this person,
Yes.
they're in this lane, and this is the next person, they're in that lane. And then when they come together, this is what happens. Like it just blends very well. There are some characters who we've seen before, there are some characters who are new.
I think you're 100% right that this movie is not perfect. It is straightforward, but it is very entertaining. And I think that like it doesn't have to be perfect. If you're just wanting, you're wanting a movie you haven't seen before, or maybe you haven't seen in a while, you're going to be entertained by it. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of it has to do with the performances, but also the suspense of the movie. Even though it's a very straightforward movie, there are these really beautiful and terrifying, haunting images. I mean, as each attack is happening to Frankie, it is what constitutes this as a horror movie because from her perspective, even though there might be some of the devoted out there that would love something like this for to happen to them, or at least would be like honored if it did, from somebody like Frankie, as a woman, as anybody, you'd be terrified. All of a sudden you're in the bathtub and then you're having these holes just punched into your arm, which I also like that the movie covers the idea. It takes the time to make a commentary about certain things in religion, and I don't think it's at all disrespecting religion. It's sort of saying like about the crucifix or about the first thing that happens to her. She's almost hopeful for a second. Wait, this can't be stigmata because it happened through my wrist, but all the images of Jesus are through the hands. And he's like, well, actually, it's been determined at the time of Jesus. This is what Gabriel Byrne's character, Father Andrew, tells her is that it would have been through the wrist. She's like, well, wait, then so you're saying for all these years, thousands of years, that everybody's wrong? And he's like, no, still right. It's an interpretation, which again, that's what I think the Bible is and religion. Like everybody wants there to be this one concrete answer, but humankind is not just one concrete answer. So like I like that this movie is like, hey, I think the movie is really trying to be like, let's do religion better. Let's be better people. But these images are beautiful and haunting. Like when she's at the club and the crown's coming down, you just see, I mean, of course, Patricia Arquette is designed as an actress to be to have these haunting images with her, or like you said, it just happening in daylight. The subway scene, though, I think is one of the most effective because you're still sort of like, even though you might go in knowing the concept of the movie, when you see this happening and you see her like talking to the priest and she's almost like, are you Father Kieran, and like yelling at him, you're like, something's wrong here. And then it all happens. But I love everybody can see it happening. It's not like Frankie, we think you're going crazy. They're like, no, we know something's wrong with Frankie. We don't know what, but something's going wrong because they're seeing it. She's held up with these straps and being whipped, and it's intense. And again, from the point of view of somebody who's not familiar with this, it's this very scary concept. But what did you think of the overall suspense and all that?
So I do feel like this one is more suspenseful because there are some creepy scenes, which we'll talk about that. But when you were talking about some of like the shots, like the visual shots, one particular scene, besides from the one you already mentioned, the one with the thorns, it's a gorgeous shot. And I know you know which one I'm talking about. But I absolutely love the scene when she's on the train and she's holding on. And it's like you could see that there's something that it looked eerie, it felt eerie. It was just like, because what could you do? And she is in such a public setting. And the fact that there were people around her, and clearly you even said this already, that they know that there's something wrong. They don't know what is wrong with her. I feel like when I think about this movie and how, again, it was made in the late 90s, the way that these tense scenes just have me still so curious about it. Like I was completely hooked. Even that scene that you mentioned when she is on top of a hood of a car, and she's carving something in. And just before we hear her voice, just seeing her face, her eyes, you know that there's something wrong. I just love the fact that even though this is an older movie, and I wish I would have watched it as a kid because I know it would have creeped the heck out of me. But even though it's an older movie, I still feel like these suspenseful, intense scenes, they still hold up so well. They're still so
Yeah.
effective. Like the sound effect, like the sound effect design, the soundtracks, Patricia Arquette on screen, like you said, there's just something about her scream. There's something about her face when she's scared, and she's just so believable. I don't know. I just feel like it oozes like intensity with this movie. Like you know that it's gonna get creepy. You know that there's gonna be scenes that's gonna be like very suspenseful, but it goes past than I could even imagine. I was completely hooked because of of course, like the suspenseful scenes, the oozing of the 90s, it was raining all the time. That definitely added to the suspense when she ran across the street that time, which you see these in movies, but I really did think that she was going to get hit. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like this is an underrated movie, but it's very much underrated when it comes to like the tension. I don't feel like that gets talked about enough.
Yeah, I just want to say too to what you're saying, like it oozes 90s or like you mentioned the sound design, and it made me kind of think like that time in history was a very specific time. It has a very specific look. And I was thinking about like trend that we have now with horror movies where there's sort of this like go back to the nostalgic 70s or early 80s, which I of course love. I mean, I feel like, one of the earliest examples is something like House of the Devil, where even the credits, everything feels very 70s. Obviously, shows like Stranger Things, they really embrace that early 80s aesthetic.
Mhm.
And I love it too. It follows even that, that sort of takes place in this sort of timeless period, but it's filmed very much like a late 70s horror movie. And I love those. I really do. But there is something to be said about this time in history, the 90s, where it was all new. It was about the flash. It was about like, how can we take these images and make them sharp and flashy and edgy. Edgy was probably the word I would use to describe this film in terms of the look and style. And as much as I love the original 70s, 80s horror movies, and I love this sort of throwback to how we now look at them visually. But I still a part it will always be nostalgic for me because that's when I was coming into horror. I saw this one in the theater. I had seen, I was watching Scream 2 in the theater, all those movies. This was a part of that time for me. And it was that look and that flash. And I think that makes this kind of really special.
I do have a question for you. How did
Please.
you feel about Gabriel Byrne, his character, Andrew, Father Andrew, him and Frankie getting together? I know we kind of like
Okay.
touched on it, but is that like a no? Isn't it a no?
Yeah, I think that that's why it's obviously the taboo and they're playing with it. And I like the fact that his character admits that, he wasn't always a priest and that he does have these desires, but his path in life sort of took him
Hmm.
towards celibacy, and she kind of confronts him about it. And I think, as you're watching, each moment is sort of like the first one when she's in the bathtub. That day she had been like worrying about possibly being pregnant. Well, it's sort of by the end of the night, there's always a sort of trigger. And the scene where they're talking at the little cafe area, and that's when they're getting a little bit more friendly, intimate. So I think that the stigmata is always sort of triggered when she's maybe crossing a religious line in some way, and it kind of culminates her biggest demonic possession or outburst is when she actually makes a move on him, on which then sets off this huge explosion from her, and it's very intense and brutal. But it's also, when we get to the ending, I don't have a lot to say about it. Although there's an alternate ending, which isn't very different, but there's a specific difference because they now have like reached this level of like beyond relationship, like coupling or even just friendship. They've bonded, and I
Yeah.
really think that's kind of beautiful.
I felt like it was beautiful, but it felt like it was like a no-no, but then it's just like, well, technically they didn't really do anything, but that's still kind of like, playing with fire type of type of stuff, then the more they started to talk, it's just like they have a connection. I thought that was it was beautiful in a way. It's a horror movie, but it was beautiful because I don't feel like he crossed I mean, maybe he did cross the, I don't know too much about, what they can do, what they can't do type of stuff. I guess he did cross a line because maybe it was just in his head type of thing.
Right.
But I will say this with in Frankie's head, I will say this. I didn't even realize what you said, that every single time her attacks happened. Whoa. Yeah. Okay. Now I
It's
have to
only
go back
something
and
I've
watch it.
noticed from watching it over the years. I don't think it's really clicked till the last
Yeah.
couple times I've watched it. Like, oh, it's always kind of on the
That's
heels of
pretty
something.
awesome.
The Jonathan Pryce is now wanting to silence because he's realizing the message that Frankie's trying to get out through writing and speaking is that this Gospel of Thomas. And
Hmm.
so he decides he's going to kill her, and he tries to strangle her, and it's a shocking moment. And luckily, Gabriel Byrne figures it out and comes back and saves her. And I like that it ultimately is his own temptation. Like, he has to have faith. Because
Hmm.
going back to what you were just saying now about the relationship, is that he's crossed some lines, but almost crossing those lines has given him more
Yeah.
faith.
Hmm.
And there's the flame everywhere. He's got to walk through it, and he does. And ultimately, he rescues Frankie.
So, okay, I love the way that you explained it because again, I watched it twice and I had to like really grasp what was going on. But that scene where he was just like strangling her, like you said, it was just like, okay, something is clearly wrong. And it was shocking. It happened so fast. And I love the way things play out. I loved when, Father Andrew Kernan, when he comes back and he ultimately saves her. And kind of you said already, if he probably would have never crossed that line, he would have never gotten his faith back. He probably wouldn't have gone back, in the
Right.
first place. So it's just like obviously things happen for a reason, but I will say this though, it was like an awesome scene to like watch play out. But in some ways, I did want more of a bang, no type of
Absolutely.
thing. Yeah, like it was cool. Like, oh, you came back. That's great. The fire. Ah, but yeah, you just you wanted something kind of like because we were getting all these intense moments. So I wanted more. I felt like there was going to be very much like explosive type of thing.
I could not agree more. I also feel like it is lacking the ending, some sort of oomph. But the alternate ending, it pretty much ends this. I mean, it's the same exact setup. Everything happens, except what they did is for the release ending, they recut it so you kind of think Frankie's alive, but the
Hmm.
original ending, she died. Now, I will say I would not have liked that. I
Yeah,
I'm
same.
fine. I think the movie ends on sort of not necessarily an ambiguous note, but you're pretty sure she survived, and but maybe didn't, but pretty sure she did. Whereas that's more of a definitive ending. But I feel like for this girl who was not, like, I feel like it's sort of an unjust punishment. She
Yeah.
is not religious, is being inflicted with this very religious thing happening to her because somebody else was using her as a message to get this out. I don't think it's right then that she also has to die. I feel like, why, the message is out now. Can't she have
Mhm.
survived it? And so I actually prefer what we got. But
Yeah.
I agree completely that there needs to be a little oomph more to it.
I would have not liked that ending at all.
Mm.
I think that now it kind of If she survived, that's a cool thing. If she didn't, yeah, it's kind of a mystery. You have to figure it out. You as
Right.
the viewer.
I think that it's a real fun movie that's not the greatest religious horror movie ever, but I definitely think it's worth a watch. And it really looks like it's of its time, and I think that's a great thing. I think the 90s was a great time for horror, and as much as I love 70s, 80s looking horror films now, I love the 90s look of horror, and I think that Stigmata really has that energy and really pulls it off well. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House. Are you a fan of Stigmata? What are some of your favorite religiously centered themed horror movies? Thank you, Zena Dixon, the real queen of horror, for joining us tonight. As always, you can find Zena over at realqueenofhorror.com, on YouTube under her Real Queen of Horror moniker, or over at Wicked Horror. And I'm Justin. You can also find me at Wicked Horror, Horror One Pop Culture, or on X at Wicked Horror Justin. Thank you so much, Zena, for giving Stigmata a chance and watching it and discussing it with me tonight.
Thank you so much. Like, this is a movie I'm definitely going to rewatch.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I had a total blast, and we'll see y'all soon. Bye.